the type of a regime that Syria was, but because that one was Ba'athi. So the last thing you would want to go to was at the time was Iraq, and also the type of a regime that and also Syria. Okay, let's get back to our tafsir. So with our tafsir, of course, we're still doing 102 and 103. Let's go over it really quick. Telling the believers not to ask about matters that if they would have known the details for, they would basically be harmed by getting more restrictions, but certainly they were permitted to ask questions that are related to, one, seeking answers to important issues, important questions, and two, of course, if it was something that was relevant to the ayat, relevant to making them better Muslims or etc., then that was permissible. And we went in details in talking about the pronoun, and that this is not an oxymoron, and telling them not to ask questions about, and then forbidding them from asking questions, and then telling them, well, if you were to ask about it, no, this pronoun, it right there, anha, we went in details and said that this is referring to something else that is permissible to ask about. And let's continue right there. Afallahu anha, of course, asking about the permissible things. We said the Sahaba asked about 13 different matters, and we went in details in some of them. We didn't go in all of them, but we did say that some of them, for example, يسألونك عن الأنفال, يسألونك عن المحيض, يسألونك, and you would see those يسألونك, that was in 4 times. But then when you look at the other situations where they might have asked the Prophet ﷺ about certain matters, some of it is not revealed in ayat, but some of it was revealed in a hadith, or at least the explanation was covered in hadith. Let's continue. Wallahu ghafurun halim. What is ghafur? Al-ghafur is basically the one that forgives. So the one that is constantly forgiving. So one person is ghafir. Ghafir is the person that would forgive. Ghafur is a person that is consistently forgiving. Okay, what's the difference between al-maghfira and al-afu? Al-afu is to dismiss that anything happened at all, or to hold on, let me correct that. Al-maghfira is to dismiss the implication of the sin, but the actual sin, it's kept there. Okay, but the implication of it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismissed you from considering you accountable for the sin. Okay, so that's al-maghfirah. But al-afu would be that, no, you are basically dismissed from the sin, and even the implication, it's all basically, let's say, wiped out. So al-afu would be more comprehensive than al-maghfirah. Halim, what is al-hilm? When you look at halim, haluma is the root, okay? And that haluma simply means you would forgive, you would basically dismiss the person, even though you're capable of retaliating. You're capable of punishing that person, or you're capable of holding them accountable. But al-halim is, well, I'm just going to dismiss that person despite the fact that I'm capable of holding them accountable, retaliating, punishing them for that. So al-hilm would be to dismiss the person from basically being held accountable and being punished for the sin that they had committed. So Halim would be a name for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's Halim. And does that mean that we can describe a person as being Halim? Can I describe Noura as Halima? Or Bayan, for example, as Halima? Can I do that? Yes, we can. Because this is a name and a description. So there are certain names that are exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there are certain attributes that you can describe human beings with it, just like Al-Halim. That's why even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Ibrahim alayhi salam as awahun halim. What is awah and what is halim? So halim is a person that forgives. So wait, why was Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam described as awahun halim? What is awah? Awah is kathir al-ta'awwah. What is kathir al-ta'awwah? A person that makes a sound whenever they're in pain. So whenever he's in pain, he was making a sound. How is that supposed to be a good thing? No. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Prophet Ibrahim as awah, it wasn't talking about him making a sound of agony or pain or moaning because of pain. It was describing Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam that whenever he would be in a state of khushu', it wouldn't be just a state of khushu' alone, like a silent state. He would be in such a strong state of khushu' that he would not only tear of khushu', but it would go to another stage that these emotions of khushu' would even have a sound. He would even cry of khushu', and it was so strong that you could even hear the sound of his khushu', and that's what al-awah means. You know, the sound of khushu'. Of course, when you're talking about feelings, if you're smiling, you're not making a sound. But if you're laughing, you are. Why? Because the level of emotion, of happiness, the stronger it is, of course, the louder it gets. If it's a smile, it's a silent emotion. If it's a laughter, it depends on how strong it is. That's basically resembling a type of an inner energy that right now went from just a silent power within you to something stronger, that it right now has a sound to it. That's the same thing. It's not just about laughter. Same thing when we're talking about anger. Same thing when we're talking about sadness. There's sadness. A person is sad. He's, I guess, wanting to be alone, etc. But then if they're crying, that's a different energy. That's a different sound. And then if they're really sad, they're probably even crying in a different sound. And same thing when we're talking about khushu'. They could be in a state of khushu', they'll get goosebumps, but then there's another stage where this khushu' goes from the state of goosebumps to the state of probably having tears to the state of probably going farther, being aware, having the sound of khushu'. Okay, so just see those stages even when we're speaking about how it's resembled. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described Ibrahim as awahun halim, so you could see halim right there can be a description that can be given to people as well. So what is the fine line when we would know that this description can be only and exclusively be for Allah, and when it can go for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that's why it's important to learn when we're speaking about the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are certain nouns and there are the adjectives. Okay, so the nouns would be exclusive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so the word Allah, for the name Allah, that's exclusive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one can be named Allah. That's a noun. Okay, that is a name right there. But descriptions, where it's describing, for example, al-Qawi. Can I name a human being as al-Qawi? هذا هو القوي فيهم. For example, this person is the strong one out of them. For example, can I do that? Yes, you can, because it's not exclusive. But certainly, when I'm naming it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means He contains all the power. But when I'm describing a human being, that would not mean that that person contains all the power, but that would mean this is a superlative at the time. Okay, so superlative form in describing that, well, this person is the strong one out of them, where there's, of course, there's a superlative thing here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the highest, the best, the one that has the absolute power or the absolute ilm or the absolute, etc. That could only be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If anybody were to use this absoluteness in a description of good to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would be considered shirk. Okay. So قد سألها قوم من قبلكم ثم أصبحوا بها كافرين. قد سألها قوم من قبلكم. سألها what? So what is the pronoun? Hold on, let's break it down. It was asked, so the word قد, and whenever you would have قد, and you're going to look at the word after it. If the word after it is in the past tense, then that would be تحقيق. This is affirming something. But if the word after قد is in the present tense, then that would be تشكيك. قد يقول. What's قد يقول? يقول is here a present tense. That would mean that this is doubting. It is a possibility, and it's not necessarily affirming. But if the verb after it is in the past tense, then this is تحقيق. This is affirming that this had happened. So when you say قد سألها, سألها is in the past tense, that it was asked. Now this is giving me an affirmation. قوم من قبلكم. It was asked by previous nations before you. ثم أصبحوا بها كافرين. Then, of course, أصبحوا. There's a difference between أصبحوا and أمسوا. So أصبحوا, they had become early in the morning, basically, but we're going to get to that. Isn't necessarily early in the morning. Then they had become deniers of it. Well, wait a minute. So we're not supposed to ask about anything? Well, what happened to these nations? Let's talk about the context. The context is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us that He was telling us, well, you don't want to ask about things that if it were revealed to you, it would have probably increased the restrictions upon you. So you want to limit your questions. And this isn't asking about good things. This is asking about things that are irrelevant to your deen, irrelevant to what is of any importance in your life. So you're engaging in these types of questions, but this wasn't necessarily just talking about our day-to-day life. This was more relevant to when the ayat were revealed. Because if they were to ask questions like, so who's my father? Who is this? And this was something during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and if such information was given to them, like, am I going to be destined to go to Jannah or hellfire? If you were to really know the truth, you know that the Prophet ﷺ has information coming to him through Jibreel, through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through al-ghaib. So if you were to know when your death time is, or when perhaps or where your destination is, He'll give you the answer. But if you were to get the answer to such questions, it's definitely not going to be in your favor. So that's the reason for the revelation of that ayah. Now we go to the other one, and قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ, because previous nations had asked about certain requests, Just like the people of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, they actually asked for the Last Supper. The people of Bani Israel, they asked about certain details about the cow and what that looked like and what is the detailed description, and then they didn't really comply with the descriptions, and they just made things even more. They just made things even harder on themselves, and certainly more restrictions were revealed when they could have just, hey, you were ordered to slaughter a cow, end of the story, just choose any cow, slaughter a cow, and you're all done. But then they were asking, well, did it ever get any kids? Does it have any gray hair? What color is it? Etc. And then they went into more and more restrictions. And then certainly that was not necessarily because they cared about the ruling, but it was trying to basically find an excuse to not apply the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there. ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. So is it necessarily exclusive to the time of the Prophet ﷺ that you don't want to ask these restrictions, or what can we learn from all of this? So a couple things to learn from this. Number one, when you look at ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ, then they were kafirin. Is the word kafir just to mean a person that denies haqq? Or is that also meaning a person of sin? What is a kafir? So a kafir is a person that denies, or it could also be a person that basically covers things up when they know where it is and what it is. Okay, so that's the etymology of it, and that's why the farmers called a kafir. They're called a kafir not because they lack, religious integrity, but they're called a kafir because they dig holes and basically put in the seeds and cover it up. Okay. Now, kafir is basically a person that knows the truth and they still choose to disregard it, cover it up, and just move on as if it's not there. Okay, so when you look at ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ, we would learn that if there's certain information that you would know about Islam, or you would know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to just deny it or disregard it, that you would be equivalent to a person that's denying the truth, pretending like it's not there, and then without you realizing, you would be on the footsteps of a kafir person. Wait, how's that even going that way? How? So when you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you believe in Islam, and you know that, let's just say, hijab is obligatory. Okay, let's give that as an example. But then, even though you know it's obligatory, but you're procrastinating and saying, I'll do it when I get married. I'm not sure I'm ready. I'm not sure this resembles me. And you start, putting in all these different procrastinations. And without you realizing, even though you knew the truth, but you kept on procrastinating, without you realizing, you're committing the same behavior. ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. You are committing the same behavior, that is, that person at least, is committing the same behavior as al-kuffar, which is wanting to hide the fact that you recognize that that is the truth, that is a restriction, that is a commandment, that is an order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you look at ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ, that a person disregarding the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without them realizing, it's one order after another that they would disregard, and then this starts piling up and they would become exactly embracing the behavior of al-kafirin, just hiding all the truth disregarding the truth little by little. Yes, it's a sin, but these sins, with one after another, they can pile up in a person's heart and make his heart be exactly like a disbeliever's heart, even though they're committing a sin. They still have faith in their heart, but then with one, let's call it mandation or haram thing or principle after another, leaving it out and not putting it into practice, it becomes exactly like the person that just denied or just hid or just chose to disregard the truth, even though they recognize it. Okay, so now this is ثم أصبحوا بها كافرين. This is really scary, to be honest, because قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ. They knew the different rulings, and then ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا. I want to focus on the word أصبحوا. It didn't say ثُمَّ أَمْسَوا. Well, what's the difference? So أصبح is to wake up in the morning, and أمسى is to go into night. Al-Duha is to go into the, I guess, the Duha time, which is like 9 a.m., 10 a.m. That's the Duha time. Okay. When you look at ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا, it doesn't necessarily just mean that they had just become. So it's like they started out their day, they started out their life, biha kafirin. And it takes me back to the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ had said that part of the signs of Judgment Day is that يُصْبِحُ الرَّجُلُ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا. And then they would wake up as believers. But then by the time they had gone into the night hour, they're already kafir. And some will wake up, will sleep as kafir, but then they'll wake up as believers. I want to look at this wake up as believers. So why did that hadith say wake up as believers and this one say wake up as kafirin? You see what I'm saying? It's like, what happened? How did we get into all of that? And why أصبحوا بها كافرين? Subh is usually coming with morning, is usually coming where before it was dark and now you could see everything so clear to you. But then this person, despite everything being so clear and it's right there, of course, clear from the sun, and certainly everything it's not dark anymore. It's basically early in the morning. Everything's right there, glowing and bright and everything. But then despite all the clarity and despite all the light that is there, they can't even see it. They became kafiri. They can't even see it. Why? Because they had chosen to disregard those principles, disregard the light despite the fact that it's there. So how did they become so blinded from seeing it? ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ. What happened? Well, سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ. They had asked for a revelation. They had asked for a clarification. They had asked for guidance, but just turning your back against the guidance, even though it was so clear and so obvious that it was there, but then you chose to just blind, or that person chose to just close their eyes and blind themselves and blindfold themselves, even though the subh, the light, is right there, so obvious, but then they chose to be so blinded. And this is extremely important to keep in mind. فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. It's not the eyes that cannot see, it's the hearts that become so blinded. It's seeing those parables. Same thing when you look at, for example, the ayah, نسوا الله فنسيهم اذكروني أذكركم. Wait, how is the pattern there? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اذكروني أذكركم, mention my name and I'll mention yours. And therefore, نسوا الله فنسيهم. They forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and forgotten them. You look at the parables and it's coming with the same idea, that you let that mention bring in the inspiration to clarify the path of guidance to you that will be basically giving you the reminder. If you mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does it mean to mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Mention is not just saying La ilaha illallah. Because to do a dhikr, there's the oral dhikr, La ilaha illallah, reading Quran, that's the oral dhikr. There's the behavioral dhikr. Behavioral dhikr is when you act upon it. And that's coming in with this. أصبحوا بها كافرين. It's not only kafir in not mentioning the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's also in disregarding. It's also in disregarding the application of that dhikr, that you recognize that you're supposed to be acting upon the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not stealing, not looking into something haram, not doing what is wrong. This is application. This is applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And having that being said, when you look at them, أصبحوا بها كافرين, that they were kafirin in one, the mention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, kafirin in two, applying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number three, of course, there's the oral dhikr, there's the behavioral dhikr, there's the audio dhikr, there's the audio dhikr, and certainly there's the dhikr that what you yourself would apply in terms of the environment itself. What type of people are you surrounding yourself with? That there's that type of dhikr. We usually just focus on the dhikr to mean words that are being said, but it's not just words. It's the whole idea, the vibe that you are embracing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the whole thing of the dhikr. What does your friend remind you of? Do they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or do they remind you of entertainment? That's a type of dhikr. What do they remind you of? Just the gaining, just the entertainment, just shopping, whatever it is? Or do they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a good vibe of dhikr. That's a good vibe of dhikr. That person is basically investing in making you the mu'min. Let's flip this ayah. قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا مُؤْمِنِينَ. We're going to flip it. Okay? So what happened? Did they ask, can we say قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا مُؤْمِنِينَ? Well, al-mu'min would not necessarily get into such questioning because they would embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles. So it cannot be قَدْ سَأَلَهَا قَوْمٌ قَبْلِكُمْ ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا مُؤْمِنِينَ. But if they know the truth, and for a believer, if they were to believe in it and embrace the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they would not be held accountable. In fact, that would increase their iman. Wait, what's the evidence that would increase their iman? وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُمْ. That's the evidence. وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُم. Hold on, let's break down that ayah. وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا. We're going to get that ayah. وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُم. Let's look at this ayah. let's look at this ayah and see. What is it saying? وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا. Let's break it down. Those that had chosen guidance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase guidance for them, وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُمْ, and would even inspire them with religious integrity. So wait a minute. When you say وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا, those that had already been guided, so if they're already guided, why are you guiding them even more? Because there's no way to be guided unless you start taking the steps of guidance. Don't expect that you're going to be the greatest of a person, which is in a place of taqwa, if you don't actually take the steps of guidance. You have to put in a commitment. You have to do this type of consistency. زادهم هدى. You start in with the path of wanting to take that commitment to act upon the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that will develop زادهم هدى. Then that will develop into increasing your ability to be more consistent in guidance. Then that consistency will then enhance your taqwa, and that's how you would grow from the level of wanting. The word ihtadaw is different than zadahum hudan. In Lugha Arabiya, when you say ihtada, is different when it didn't say walladhina hudu. What's the difference? Ihtadaw, this alif right there and the ta would actually mean that they are investing on their own. They're investing a type of a potential to basically put it in this root, huda or hada. The root is hada. So when I say ihtada, this alif right there and the ta to be within a verb actually means that there is a potential, there is an energy invested in this verb. Ihtada, i'tala. Whenever you would have this ta right there, that means there's an effort being invested. Then when you put in a small amount of investment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala zadahum huda. Who's the one that's going to give them the increase in that huda? Zadahum huda. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come in to add more to it. Well, what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will add more to it? You put in a little investment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you more power. Give you more power to increase in your iman. What does that look like? وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Another ayah. Let's look at this ayah. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Let's look at this one in Surah Al-Ankabut. Let's look at this ayah. Okay? Let's see. In Surah Al-Ankabut, the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, and those that had put in the effort for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. What does it mean, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ? لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُم is an oath. This noon, right there, this noon, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُم, and the lamb is an oath. What does this oath actually mean? It's a confirmation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling you that there's a promise. But the promise would only apply if you were to put in the effort. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا. You got to put an effort to basically start and put in the effort to not let your urges control you, but you got to control the urge. That's the effort. You put in the effort, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the different paths to basically help you find roads, not one road, but roads to Jannah. Not one road, but roads to Jannah. So even if one road, maybe let's say memorizing the Quran wasn't too easy for you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you another path. Maybe giving donations is a lot easier for you. Maybe another path. Hey, you're a very extroverted person. You just love dealing with people, and you just know how to probably help people. Maybe help people become better Muslims. Maybe you have the potential to talk to people and to bring them into Islam. You are not the best in memorization, but you're really good at inviting people, and you just have that potential. Here's another path. Maybe you're not too extroverted, but you're a person that knows how to solve problems. So yeah, I'll work on solving problems, maybe helping the masajid do better management or stuff like that, or perhaps maybe working with mothers, maybe hey, social working, whatever it is, just giving you different capacities, learning more about your capacity. And then there's so many different doors, so many different paths, and you are doing a better job in one path and not necessarily just exclusive to one pathway. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open many paths for you to choose which path are you capable of, I guess, going through to finding Jannah. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with al-muhsinin. Who's al-muhsin? Al-muhsin, well, the more committed you are in one of these paths, or maybe you're taking more than one path, and whatever that leads you to Jannah, that's the one that's Allah. As long as you're going to Jannah, well, great. That's all we need. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. The person that is more consistent, the person that is more committed, the person that is constantly living the taqwa, that's the person that's going to get to basically the level that, what is it? الإحسان أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. It's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember that hadith Jibril alayhi salam. There we go. So now we could see that وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى وَآتَاهُمْ تَقْوَاهُم is coming in parallel, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا, and also coming in parallel with this ayah, that at the end, whatever you would invest in, that's basically going to come in to give you that commitment, give you that strength in taqwa. And certainly, if the person yet, on the other hand, chooses to deny, disregard, so disregarding is also a form of denial. If a person knew the truth but chose to disregard it, then that person is supposed to worry that they might actually be taking a route as the route of al-kuffar. You knew what Islam says. You knew what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying in regards to 1, 2, 3, 4, but you chose to not apply that one, and not apply that one, and not apply that one, and not apply that one. Where are you going with all of this? Are you choosing to just disregard all these different paths to Jannah, and instead, without you realizing, choosing to take more paths and open more paths to hellfire? That's why that ayah, ثُمَّ أَصْبَحُوا بِهَا كَافِرِينَ, is really scary. You had known the information, but chose, and without you realizing, despite all this daylight, this sabah, this truth is so apparent, but then, despite all of that, that person's heart was blocked to see the truth and take the path to haqq. ما جعل الله من بحيرة ولا سائبة ولا وصيلة ولا حام ولكن الذين كفروا يفترون على الله الكذب وأكثرهم لا يعقلون. Now that takes us into a different path, slightly, not too much on a different thing, but it was letting us see the pattern that many will choose. They will recognize what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, but then they'll make their own narrative. They'll make their own narrative that it was nothing but coming with a good intention. They'll say, I've got a good intention. I've got a good reason why I'm doing this. I'm sure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge my intention and not necessarily the action. So don't be too fixated on the action and just look into my intention. My intention is good, they'll claim. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, yes, they had probably claimed to have the good intention to probably doing certain rituals in relationship with certain animals and how they abandoned certain animals or how they regarded certain animals as sanctuary or whatever it is, and certain practices. But these practices that they had practiced, they thought, well, we have a good intention. It was to get us closer to Allah. It was supposed to give us a vibe of a positive energy and all such claims. Or it was basically wanting to be just, it was trying to be nice. Of course, the narratives can be sometimes manipulating us without us realizing. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying right there, وَلَكِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ. Just to create a narrative, the narrative itself is not enough to scrutinize and say, well, I've got a good intention, therefore you just got to judge my intention and recognize that I have a good motive, but we also have to recognize the foundation of that action. So the ayah is basically saying, وَلَكِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يَفْتَرُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ. But the disbelievers, the word is yaftarun. What is yaftarun? Yaftarun means to create a lie. In other words, to right there create some form of a narrative that within it is really nothing but blasphemy, is really nothing but a lie. But they wanted to give it some rhetoric. It sounds so nice. It sounds so appealing. It sounds so intimidating that, hey, yeah, that sounds so nice. Let's embrace that. And then it sounds so inspirational. But then just remember, the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna min al-bayani la-sihra. What does that mean? Some of the eloquence can actually contain some form of magic, some form of a manipulation, some form of seeming that it's coming in from a good intention, but the truth of it is that it contains a lot of manipulation that you don't even recognize where the truth begins and where it ends. So you really want to be careful, especially in the times that we're living in today, in the postmodern era. Postmodern era is basically the Sharia of atheism. It's basically considered that there is no truth and that it's all about you creating your own truth. And in order to market the new so-called truth, you create an emotion to it. So let's look at the LGBT, for example. Don't tell me about and start talking about, well, there's male, female, that's how we find reproduction happening. But no, let's recreate a new truth. How do we recreate the new truth? It's called deconstruction. Deconstruct what the definition of male is and what the definition of female is. And it's not about your biology. It's about, hey, there's the new word for it, and they call it gender, which basically is Your biology could be one thing, but your anatomy doesn't necessarily resemble what what uh, your social uh, uh, your social definition is looking like. So there we go. What do? We would deconstruct it, and of course, with all these different ways of confusing the masses when it's really simple, and they'll say, "No, what you are here being." Somebody that is not inclusive, you're not embracing people's orientation, and the list goes on and on. And of course, in a language that seems like it is nothing but inspirational, nothing but being inclusive. And of course, political correctness comes in, but it's nothing but a mirage, nothing but a way of manipulating truth, manipulating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, manipulating the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things, and it's making it seem, and during our times, it's presented like as if it's education, as if it's knowledge, as if it's research, as if it's science, as if it's a way of respecting others, not being judgmental, when in reality, what we would recognize is that يفترون على الله الكذب. They would claim, they would make up lies and attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we would say, well, postmodernism doesn't even believe in God, because they regard that everything is nothing but matter in motion. There is no truth, but one truth, that there is no truth. So therefore, they don't necessarily attribute it to God. Just by attributing it as if it is truth, that's basically claiming right there that it is basically the truth, and that this is what nature reveals, that this is what we see as basically guidance, and that this is justice, etc. That's a form of al-iftira' ala Allah al-kadhib. That's a form of making lies and attributing it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. The majority of them, they do not, the word is يَعْقِلُونَ. لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. Well, wait a minute. When we say العقل, does that mean ذكاء? When we say عقل, what's the difference between اللب, العقل, and the ذكاء? Well, first of all, what does لا يعقلون mean? لا يعقلون means they don't comprehend. Most of them, they don't comprehend. What does that mean? They're not stupid. They've got their IQ right there. So what is that ayah saying? العقل is different than الذكاء. What's the difference? So when the Prophet, let's take it back to the Prophet describing women as ناقصات عقل. Describing women as ناقصات عقل. That women lack aql. So women lack IQ? No. Aql is different than IQ. Aql is more of a type of consistency, and it's also al-i'ql, the lugha Arabiya, we would say i'ql. The Prophet ﷺ said i'ql wa tawakkal. What is i'ql? I'ql is to tie something. So you're confirming, you're tying something, you're being consistent with something, okay? Affirmative, etc. Determined, that's al-aql. So when you look at أكثرهم لا يعقلون, it's not that they lack IQ. It's that you're going to see such thoughts because it's not based on fact, and it's based on a lot of theories, it's based on a lot of influences from their own whims and desires. You're going to see these laws in continuous change. The culture is going to be changing on, and frequent changing, and because they don't know the basis of truth, so they start losing little by little. They continue in changing the laws, they continue in changing their culture, they continuously continue in changing their principles, because it's not based on facts. It's based on their own whims. It's based on their own imagination. It's based on, of course, fiction, superstition. The list goes on and on. Then they will eventually, أكثرهم لا يعقلون, most of them, because they don't recognize the paradigm and with the foundation of all this iftira, all this narrative, you will see أكثرهم لا يعقلون, most of them, they will continuously fall and not recognize the truth and not recognize the foundation, and they will be manipulated in such narratives. That's the majority. لا يعقلون. Majority will be blinded by such narratives. So take me back to the women part. Take me back to the women part. So why would the Prophet ﷺ describe women as naqsatu aql? Why would the Prophet ﷺ describe women as naqsatu aql? Does that mean we're lacking aql? You want to keep in mind, the Prophet ﷺ did explain naqsatu aql in the hadith, and he said, well, a woman's witness, of course, on certain matters, would be half the man's witness. فَتِلْكَ نُقْصَانُ عَقْلِهَا, would be half the man's witness. Okay, then what? Then you got Surah al-Baqarah also emphasizing that the reason why a woman's witness would be half is basically because a woman, if one forgets, the other one is going to remind her. And what does that mean? So when you're looking at nuqsan al-aql, it's not related to women lacking IQ. They can be excellent in their IQ. But the ayah was, and the hadith were emphasizing that women generally go through different stages in their in their body, whether we're speaking about during pregnancy, during menopause, perimenopause, and all of that, that actually affects more than just their reproductive system. These ahadith and this ayah is indicating that women's hormones in women's body is actually affecting more than the reproductive system, but it's actually affecting even their neurological system and their ability to remember, and sometimes their ability to determine, their ability to be consistent on a lot of things. So shouldn't women then be not held accountable as much as men? Certainly. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismissed women from praying and fasting even during their cycle. What are you trying to say here? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismissed women from certain responsibilities because they're women? The answer is yes. Because of the fact that their body is basically different, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only did the Prophet ﷺ tell us that they are naqsatu aql, but because they are naqsatu aql, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dismissing women from certain religious obligations, Salat al-Jumu'ah, and for example, jihad, a lot of different things, dismissed women from those things and basically told them, well, إذا صامت المرأة خمسة صلت المرأة خمسها وصامت شهرها وأطاعت زوجها وحفظت فرجها دخلت من أي أبواب الجنة شاءت. She only has a couple of things. We're going to pray your 5 daily prayers. Do your siyam, do your hajj if you need to, if you are basically having the capacity to do so, and fast your siyam, do your zakah, and obey your husband. That's enough for you because it's already too much on your plate. That's enough. And certainly, of course, we're talking about the other things. So just realizing that one it's not necessarily a derogatory thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is somehow disregarding that naqsatu aql, therefore they're subhuman. This isn't calling women subhuman whatsoever, but this is actually saying there's a reality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in women, and therefore sometimes this can come with certain implications without us realizing, which takes us back when the Prophet ﷺ had actually mentioned during the time of Dajjal, when he also mentioned that most of the women are going to be in, well, most of the people that are dwellers in hellfire are actually women. Well, what happened? Why? Because many times with nuqsan al-aql, we tend to sometimes, as women, this isn't misogyny, I'm a woman like you, but we can easily get carried away with certain narratives and let sometimes those emotional, I guess, let's call them drives, can sometimes be an emotional drive rather than aql, clarification, because aql comes with determination, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had obligated that when we're speaking about matters that require decision making, and we're speaking about matters that are life decision making, like marriage, for example, you need to have your wali. Why? Because you really need this type of aql to give you that determination, because you could easily fall in your emotions, and that person, that man, there are more men con artists than women, and they know how to play the game. Men, yeah, they can be really evil and they can give you the nicest face on earth. You got to be careful. And the one that's going to be capable of spotting that is another man like him, because you as a woman, oh, you're too kind to spot all of these con artists. You're just too emotional. You could easily fall for that. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I want you to have your wali along with you, because, girl, they could really manipulate you. They're just experts in being con artists. So I want you to have your wali with you. Now, looking at that, when you look at أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, just seeing these patterns that coming with al-aql actually brings in, al-aql means to be consistent. Al-aql means to recognize the paradigms. Al-aql means to be wise in recognizing al-wahi in the source of ilm. Because remember, the source of ilm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنِّ. طب الظن, is it related to aql? Yes, it is. How? الظن is speculation. الظن is speculation. وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسِ. وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسِ. What is that? That's emotions. That's desires. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent al-huda to them, guidance to them. So what happened? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, those that would follow al-dhan are basically, they would think they're using their brain. But in reality, it's their brain gone wrong. Their estimation gone wrong. Their evaluation, their data, their interpretation had definitely gone wrong. To make sure that your evaluation data, your feelings don't manipulate you, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. You got to find al-wahi. Al-wahi is the only factual thing that you could depend on, which is, if you were to go back to the philosophers, you would see the different philosophers, they were always, well, you want to base something on fact. So where does the fact begin from? And that's where, of course, you would have, Kant, and, they would, and then, of course, eventually, well, Descartes, it's like, I think, therefore I am, which, of course, got it from later Al-Ghazali, was discovered that it goes back to Al-Ghazali. And Al-Ghazali, he also went into how do I prove what is the basis of knowledge? And then Al-Ghazali leaves the Ghazali, well, basically leaves the Nizamiya school in Baghdad and goes to Al-Quds. For 4 years, he's trying to understand, well, what would make the basis of knowledge. And then in his book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, he just says, well, after all the thinking and after all the research that I was trying to get to, well, what would be the basis of fact? He said, it was just نور قذفه الله في قلبي. نور قذفه الله في قلبي. It's just the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in my heart, and that is al-wahi. That's the start of ilm. If your ilm is not based on al-wahi, you're going to find yourself going into this ebb and flow, wave after wave. You're going to be confusing your facts. So, therefore, what do we recognize? That al-wahi is the basis. So, how do we understand it? Can women also be there? Well, certainly, the anatomy, women's anatomy is different than men, certainly. And of course, definitely, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created women and their body to basically be connected with their, of course, with their womb, with their rahim, with what they're created to carry, which is babies. There you go. And along with that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted women with a lot of different potentials, but at the same time, taken away certain potentials and given it to men and told them, well, you're going to be responsible for 1, 2, 3. Those are the potentials needed for such a responsibility. Does that mean men are better than women? That's a very futile question. Men are not better, and neither are women better. But at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically answers the question and says, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ صَالِحًا مِّن ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنثَىٰ فَنَحْيِيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبَةً. Simple. You do good, whether male or female, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the good life, the hereafter, regardless. It's not an issue of male, female. Simple as that. Because I got to go, so inshallah, we will continue. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, Noura saying science is actually showing the center or brain is the heart. Subhanallah. Well, I don't know what science is, so I wouldn't want to comment on that one. But anyhow, if there's anything that anybody would like to say or comment or probably ask, I'd be happy to answer, inshallah. I guess everybody's quiet.
You have to go though. I was going to say something.
I have to go. I know.
Okay, never mind.
I can take a minute, Noura.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, subhanAllah, as women, we tend to make a lot of connections in our brains,
Right.
Related to emotions and all these different connections, subhanAllah. And men's brains, they're totally different,
I was listening to this podcast, Noura, of this neurologist that was neuroscientist and not neurologist, but neuroscientist. And she was doing these studies on women and how their reproductive system and the estrogen levels and all of that is related to memory and related to our capacity and our ability to think about different things. And it's quite interesting. I really recommend watching that podcast. You can put perimenopausal and neurology and podcast, and it's quite interesting to really see that a woman's body is
not just that, but our brain anatomy is totally different.
Absolutely.
Too.
It's just interesting. And she was talking
about. That's why it's so dumb when they're saying about the gender thing. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. It's contradicting the ABCs of science. If you're female to the bone, to your DNA. Okay, and if you're male to the DNA, to your bone, to your DNA. There's you can change on the outside. It doesn't change the fact on the inside. It's the truth. You cannot manipulate yourself and say, but I feel that way. Your feelings do not necessarily reflect the truth of the different things that surround you.
Yeah, exactly.
Allah
Okay,
understand.
Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. So, inshallah, we'll see you all I'll try tomorrow. Most likely, I won't be capable of being there tomorrow because it's a last minute, like tomorrow's my last day. So I don't think I'll be able to do the class tomorrow. I hope I'll be able to do the class after tomorrow, though, inshallah.
Inshallah, bidnillah.
وإياكم. All right, Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and inshallah, we'll